If you still feel, even if you don't admit it, that someone should show up at some point, someone who finally understands you, someone who recognizes everything you've endured in silence, then there is an expectation living inside you, and that expectation is weakening you every single day, not because you are weak, but because waiting is exhausting. There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from the body. It comes from a mind that never rests, because it is always looking outward, always waiting for a sign, an answer, a change that does not depend on you. Maybe you call it hope, maybe you call it patience. Maybe you tell yourself that you're being understanding, human, sensitive. But Marcus Aurelius already warned that what you call virtue may simply be attachment in disguise. Because when you place your peace in someone else's actions, you hand over control of your emotional stability, and people are unstable. They change, disappear, fail, not out of malice, but by nature. Most people live creating silent agreements with the world, agreements that were never spoken, yet are internally enforced every single day. After everything I've done, this shouldn't be happening. After everything I've endured, someone should notice. At some point, life will compensate me. But life does not compensate. It responds. And while you wait for compensation, time keeps passing. This is where most people fail. They turn expectation into identity. Without realizing it, you begin to live as someone who is always about to be saved, about to be recognized, about to be understood, and to live in the about to is to live suspended. Marcus Aurelius wrote something simple, almost dry to himself. Do not place your tranquility in what does not depend on you. He didn't say this out of coldness, he said it out of clarity. Because the moment your peace depends on something external, you become a hostage. Hostage to other people's moods, hostage to their behavior, hostage to situations you do not control. The problem is not feeling, the problem is depending. When you wait for someone to come and save you, you postpone important decisions, delay necessary changes, tolerate situations that should have already ended, not because you want to suffer, but because deep down, you still expect something external to resolve it. This waiting is silent. No one sees it, but it consumes you. It drains your energy, your clarity, your strength. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to accept a simple truth. Maybe no one is coming, not because you don't deserve it, but because life does not work like an emotional rescue. Marcus Aurelius did not write to comfort you. He wrote to wake you up. And the first step of that awakening is realizing that while you wait to be saved, your life does not begin. It stays on pause, and no life on pause becomes strong. There is a kind of waiting that makes no noise. It does not announce itself, it does not show up in clear words, but it governs decisions, thoughts, and behaviors. It is invisible waiting. You wake up, live your routine, fulfill your obligations, and still feel that something inside you is suspended, as if real life hasn't started yet. This waiting doesn't look like weakness. On the contrary, it often disguises itself as virtue. You tell yourself you're being patient, understanding, that you're giving time to time. But most of the time, this is not patience. It is emotional postponement. It is the sense that something external needs to happen before you can fully move forward. Maybe it's a response, an apology, recognition, someone staying. And while that doesn't happen, you live with half your strength. Marcus Aurelius warned that the human mind suffers more from what it imagines than from what it actually faces. Waiting feeds imagination. It creates scenarios, builds dialogues that never happen. And the more you imagine, the less present you become. This is where most people fail again. They confuse this waiting with hope. But hope, when it paralyzes, stops being a virtue and becomes an anchor. You start making smaller decisions than you could. You accept less than you deserve. You tolerate more than you can bear, all because deep down you still expect something to change without you having to act. This waiting creates invisible emotional contracts. You don't say them out loud, but you feel them. I did my part, so someone else should. After everything I've lived through, life should. If I'm patient enough, this will resolve itself. But these contracts were never signed, and every time they are not fulfilled, frustration appears, then resentment, and over time a bitter sense of personal injustice. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should not live as if we were made to last thousands of years, because life happens now, not after something external gets resolved. While you wait, you live in defense mode, always watching other people's behavior, always interpreting silences, always trying to understand what others think of you. This consumes mental energy, and mental energy is finite. Invisible waiting steals that energy little by little, without drama, without noise, until one day you realize you are tired without knowing exactly why. It's not the routine, it's not the work, it's the silent dependence. You realize that your peace is conditional, that your calm depends, that your strength rises and falls according to how the world responds or doesn't respond. Marcus Aurelius did not accept this kind of life, not because he was insensitive, but because he understood it as an elegant form of slavery. When your stability depends on what is not under your control, you are never truly free. For the Stoics, freedom had nothing to do with doing whatever you want. It had everything to do with not being controlled by what happens outside of you. Invisible waiting keeps you emotionally kneeling even when, on the outside, you appear strong. And the most dangerous part is that the longer you live like this, the more normal it becomes, until you forget what it feels like to live without waiting. But there comes a point when something starts to bother you, a silent discomfort, a sense that you are living below what you could be. That discomfort is not weakness, it is clarity, beginning, because waiting only controls you while it goes unnoticed. The moment you see it, it begins to lose its power. Waiting for help doesn't just make you tired, it weakens you, because every time you expect something external to fix what's happening inside you, you give away a portion of your power, and power once given is rarely returned. Seneca warned that a man who depends emotionally on others is never standing upright. He lives leaning, constantly adjusting his behavior so as not to lose support. This creates a silent fragility, because you begin to measure your decisions by the fear of losing someone, the fear of displeasing, the fear of being alone. And when fear governs your choices, your life stops being guided by principles and starts being guided by need. Most people don't realize how they weaken little by little, because emotional dependence does not present itself as weakness. It presents itself as attachment, as loyalty, as excessive care. But deep down, it is nothing more than insecurity in disguise. Marcus Aurelius warned precisely about this when he wrote that if you allow yourself to be disturbed by something external, the problem is not the thing itself, but the value you assign to it. When you wait for help, you begin to live in a state of constant vigilance, watching for signs, interpreting words, trying to guess intentions. And this drains your mental energy because you are never fully present. A part of you is always projected into what hasn't happened yet. The longer you live this way, the more fragile you become in the face of frustration, because every absence feels like rejection. Every silence feels like abandonment. Every failure becomes proof that you are not enough. Epictetus said that suffering begins when we wish the world were different from what it is. And waiting for help is exactly that. Wishing someone would act in a specific way so that you can feel okay. But people do not exist to sustain your internal stability. And when you understand this, something begins to change, because you realize that continuing to wait is not hope. It is disguised surrender. Surrendering responsibility for your own weight. Surrendering decision. Surrendering the act of cutting what must be cut. This is difficult to accept because admitting that no one is coming means letting go of the fantasy of rescue. But that fantasy is exactly what keeps you small, dependent, and vulnerable. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man's strength lies in remaining upright in the face of what happens, not in being supported by what happens. And the day you stop waiting for help is the day your posture changes. You stop asking, stop negotiating, stop explaining yourself, and begin to act, not with anger, not with resentment, but with clarity. Because when you accept that no one is coming, you stop feeling abandoned and begin to feel responsible. And responsibility, although heavy at first, is the first step toward real strength. If you've made it this far and understand that no one is coming, if something inside you recognizes that from now on the responsibility is yours, not as a burden, but as power, then make a silent commitment to yourself. Write in the comments, "I take responsibility," not to prove anything to anyone, not to please me, but as an internal marker, as the conscious decision to stop waiting and start directing your own life. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the world in his time, emperor of Rome, surrounded by armies, advisors, and crowds, and yet he wrote like someone profoundly alone. Not because he was abandoned, but because he understood something few have the courage to accept. True inner strength cannot be shared. No one can think for you. No one can decide for you. No one can hold your mind steady in difficult moments. And the more you understand this, the quieter your path becomes. Marcus Aurelius did not write to teach others. He wrote so as not to lose himself, because external leadership does not protect anyone from internal chaos. And clarity comes at a price, the price of solitude. Here it's important to understand something almost no one talks about. Emotional isolation is not punishment, it is consequence. The consequence of no longer living for other people's validation. The consequence of not needing to be understood all the time. The consequence of not explaining every decision. Marcus Aurelius knew that the more a man becomes aware of his internal duties, the less he expects comfort from the world. And that is why the more lucid you become, the less company you have. Not because people physically disappear, but because few can walk beside someone who does not complain, who does not dramatize, who does not shift blame. Most people prefer relationships based on constant emotional exchange, support, validation, agreement. And when you no longer need that, you begin to seem distant, cold, inaccessible. But what changed was not your humanity. It was your dependence. Marcus Aurelius did not isolate himself out of contempt for others, but out of respect for his own mind. He understood that if he allowed his peace to depend on the environment, he would never govern either himself or the empire. And the solitude he lived was not empty, it was structuring. It was the space where he organized his thoughts, adjusted his values, and remembered what truly mattered. The Stoic does not flee from people. He simply does not need them to remain whole. And when you understand this, something clicks inside you. You realize that silence is not absence, it is presence with yourself. That walking alone does not mean being lost. It means knowing exactly where you are going. And this clarity, although solitary, is what sustains a strength that does not depend on applause, company, or approval. There is a silent illusion that traps more people than any real hardship. The illusion that someone should have done something, should have stayed, should have protected, should have understood. This idea feels fair, logical, even moral, but it creates an internal prison that is hard to see. Because as long as you believe someone owes you something, you remain emotionally tied to the past, replaying scenes, conversations, and situations that are already over. Resentment is born right there, not as open anger, but as a constant sense of injustice, of an unpaid debt. Marcus Aurelius warned that the human mind suffers more from what it demands of the world than from what it accepts. And demanding emotional repair is one of the subtlest ways to remain trapped. Because while you wait for someone to acknowledge the mistake, apologize, or repair the damage, you postpone your own freedom. Victimhood does not arise from suffering. It arises from the narrative you build around it. the story that something was taken from you and must be returned before you can move on. But life does not function like an emotional courtroom. No one is obligated to offer the closure you want, and the longer you wait for this symbolic rescue, the longer your energy stays anchored in what has already passed. Seneca said that to suffer before the time or after the time is to waste life. And resentment is exactly that. Prolonged suffering by unconscious choice. You may not notice it, but while you demand repair, you continue to give power to someone who is no longer present, allowing past decisions to keep influencing your current stability. This creates a dangerous identity, the identity of someone who was hurt and now waits for emotional justice. But emotional justice rarely arrives, and when it does, it almost never brings peace. Because peace is not born from external repair, it is born from internal detachment. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is not to become like the one who harmed you. And that is only possible when you abandon the expectation of compensation. While you wait for someone to fix what happened, you postpone your own reconstruction. You postpone decisions. You postpone movement. You postpone life. Accepting that no one will emotionally rescue you is not denying the pain. It is preventing that pain from continuing to rule you. Because the moment you let go of the demand for repair, something loosens inside you. You stop living as someone who awaits justice and start living as someone who chooses to move forward. And that choice, although silent, is the first real step toward freedom. Epictetus did not write from comfort. He spoke from absence. He was born a slave, with no control over his own body, his own time, or his external destiny. And precisely because of that, he understood something few are able to see. When no one comes, you finally discover who you are. Because as long as rescue is still possible, you never fully support yourself. A part of you remains propped up by expectation, and expectation weakens you. Epictetus said that it is not things themselves that disturb us, but the judgments we make about them. And the most dangerous judgment of all is believing that someone should have done something for you, because that belief keeps you small, dependent, always looking outward. The absence of help may look like abandonment at first glance, but to Epictetus, it was a calling, a forced invitation to autonomy. Because when there is no one to support you, you learn to support yourself. This is hard to accept, but being saved would have kept you weak. It would have kept you dependent. It would have prevented your inner structure from forming. Abandonment, when understood, stops being a wound and becomes training, daily training in steadiness, clarity, and responsibility. Epictetus did not romanticize pain, but he did not run from it either. He understood that everything that does not depend on you can be taken away. People, positions, comfort, status. But what depends on you, your posture, your values, your judgment, that no one can remove. And when you realize that no one is coming, you stop asking why this happened to you and start asking what this demands of you now. That shift in question turns victim into agent, fragility into strength, waiting into action. Epictetus taught that freedom is not having endless external choices. It is not being a slave to what happens outside of you. And it is exactly at this point that the absence of help reveals itself as liberating. Because it cuts away all emotional crutches, forces you to stand upright, and the day you can support yourself without external backing is the day you become dangerous in the best sense of the word. Not because you harm others, but because you can no longer be controlled by neediness, expectation, or the fear of being alone. If this truth hit you on any level, if something that was said here made you pause and reflect, then mark it in a simple way. Like this video, not as support for the channel, but as a silent signal that you choose reality over illusion. Because recognizing the truth, even when it hurts, is already an act of strength. There is a day with no scheduled date, no announcement, no witnesses. It is the day you stop waiting, Not because everything has been resolved, but because something inside you has changed position. You wake up and realize you're no longer checking your phone with the same expectation. You're no longer waiting for that message, that response, that gesture that for so long felt necessary. And this realization does not come with euphoria. It comes with silence. A strange silence at first, almost uncomfortable, because the mind was used to the constant motion of waiting. But gradually, that silence starts to make sense. You realize you no longer need to justify your decisions, no longer need to explain your choices, no longer need to emotionally prepare yourself for other people's reactions. This is the moment when something matures. A Stoic would say, this is where the emotional adult is born. The one who understands that feeling is human, but dependence is optional. On that day, you begin to act without asking for invisible permission. You start making changes without waiting for approval. You start cutting what needs to be cut without negotiating with your own conscience. There is no anger in this process, no resentment. There is clarity. You understand that waiting was a way of postponing responsibility, and taking responsibility does not harden you. It organizes you. You begin to live with less anxiety because you no longer project your balance onto other people's behavior. You become less reactive because you no longer expect the world to behave a certain way for you to be okay. That day does not change your life from the outside in, but it changes everything from the inside out. Because from that point on, you stop being someone who waits and become someone who leads. And that transition, though silent, is one of the deepest a human being can experience. The discipline that truly transforms makes no noise. It is not seen, not celebrated, not shared. It happens away from eyes and outside of conversations. It is waking up and doing what needs to be done without anyone knowing, without anyone recognizing it, without anyone validating it. And that is exactly why it is so rare, because most people need to be seen to continue. They need external encouragement, applause, confirmation. But the Stoic understands that depending on validation is just another form of dependence. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you must do what is right even if no one notices, because the reward lies in the act itself. Invisible discipline is built through small daily choices, choosing not to react, choosing to remain silent, choosing to follow the plan even when motivation disappears. There is no emotional high in this process. There is consistency. And consistency is not exciting, it is steady. This is where most people quit, because there is no validation, no immediate return, no one noticing the change as it happens. But it is precisely in this silence that strength is formed. The Stoic does not measure progress by external approval, but by conduct. He knows that character is what remains when no one is watching. That is why he values habit more than speech, practice more than intention. Living this way requires accepting that the world may never recognize your effort, but it also requires understanding that recognition was never the goal. Invisible discipline does not seek applause. It builds inner structure, and that structure holds you up when everything around you fails, when people leave, when circumstances change. It is this silent strength, built day after day, that makes someone emotionally indestructible. Not because they do not feel, but because they do not depend. Amor fati is not resignation. It is not surrender. It is not weakness disguised as spirituality. For Marcus Aurelius, accepting fate was an act of power because resisting reality consumes energy that could be used to act with clarity. He wrote that everything that happens is natural, and that fighting against it is fighting against the very order of things. Acceptance does not mean liking it. It means stopping the waste of strength trying to deny what already is. When you accept reality as it presents itself, without fantasy, without emotional demands, something changes inside you. The mind stops fighting and starts operating. Acceptance restores control precisely because it eliminates internal conflict. You are no longer divided between what is and what should have been. Marcus Aurelius understood that pain is prolonged when you insist on comparing reality to an imagined version of it. And the Stoic cuts off that comparison, not out of coldness, but out of inner efficiency. Accepting fate is not crossing your arms. It is aligning expectation with reality so you can act better. When you accept that certain things will not change, that people will not return, that situations will not resolve the way you imagined, you stop reacting emotionally and start responding with intention. That is the difference between being carried by events and directing your posture in the face of them. Amor fati is saying yes to what happens so it does not destroy you. It is using every event as raw material for strengthening, not because it was chosen, but because it happened. And the moment you fully accept what is, you recover something that seemed lost. Your inner autonomy, your clarity, your control, not over the world, but over yourself. And for the Stoics, that was always the only true form of power. If after all of this, you accept that no one is coming to save you and still choose to continue, then subscribe to the channel. Not out of habit, not out of impulse, but as an inner stance, a silent signal that you have chosen a path where strength comes from within and responsibility is not outsourced. Because this space exists precisely for those who choose to continue even when no one is watching. When expectation ends, something inside you calms down, not because life became easier, but because the mind stopped fighting what it cannot control. The silence that emerges is not emptiness, it is space. Space to see clearly, to breathe without the tension of waiting, to exist without dependence. At that point, you understand that no one is coming, and this realization stops hurting because it is no longer interpreted as abandonment, but as reality. A reality that is hard at first, but honest. And honesty is liberating. Marcus Aurelius knew that freedom is not born when the world changes. It is born when you stop demanding that it be different. By accepting that no one is going to save you, you do not become cold. You become whole. You stop looking outward for support and begin to rely on something more solid, your own conduct, your own clarity, your own presence. And when this shift happens, resentment loses its grip. Anxiety diminishes, the need for approval dissolves. What remains is a simple, steady sense of being in the right place, even if the path is solitary. No one is coming, and this is not abandonment. It is the beginning of your strength.